So in this mini lesson, we're going to have a look at Ted Hughes's background a bit more. So he's not the easiest of poets to understand. He's one of my absolute favorite poets, and I really, really want other people to love him. So I did this kind of extra lesson, basically just to sort of talk about why he's great and also help you understand him a bit more so that his poetry is not so difficult. I think the first time I started reading Ted Hughes, I was probably about 13 or 14. My gran really loved him, so she gave me some Ted Hughes poems to read. And I remember finding them really dark and powerful, but also really mysterious and kind of difficult to sort of get my head around. So hopefully you're not going to have the same experience as me, because we're going to go into his life and who he is as a person now, so that it's a lot easier for you in general. I'm also going to try and whiz through this a little bit quicker than what you would normally sort of do, so that it kind of is a reasonable length for a lesson, because I could probably talk about him for about 3 or 4 hours without stopping. So I'm going to try and spare you that and just give you, a decent amount of background on Ted Hughes. If you want the full amount of everything that I ever wrote about his background, then you can download this document from the Scribbly page. So go to scribbly.com and sign up to the Ted Hughes course, and you can find it there. Or you can subscribe to the whole thing if you want as well, and download everything. Good. So he's an English poet. He's born in, I cannot pronounce it, Methalmroyd, West Yorkshire, which is really similar to me. Actually, I'm from Yorkshire as well. I'm from South Yorkshire rather than West Yorkshire, but it looks like this. If you've ever been to Yorkshire, pretty much the whole of Yorkshire looks like this. Some of it's darker, but it's kind of like half farm or kind of wild land, and then little towns and cities, usually that you find in valleys in between quite wild spaces. So yeah, Hughes had this very rural kind of upbringing, and his father was a carpenter, his mother was a housewife, his parents ran a newsagent, so he's not from a literary background. It's one thing that I think is really cool about him. He ended up such a famous poet. He ended up, getting official positions to write in Cambridge. He actually got into Cambridge University, but he's not from any kind of academic or kind of posh background at all, which, it's great being from those backgrounds as well, but to make a career out of your life, like a poetic career out of your life without being from that background, is super impressive. He's very focused on his career his whole life, and very, very, very confident on who he is as a person, that he's going to be a poet. So yeah, beautiful little place this. There's actually Ted Hughes's house got sold to a writing charity called Arvon, and you can do retreats there. So about a year ago, I went on a writing retreat in Ted Hughes's old house, which is just up the road from where he lived as a child. So yeah, if you ever visit this place, you can also, visit his house and even stay there. Like I stayed in one of the rooms there, which was awesome. So a little bit more about him. My board's going a bit funny. Yeah, so he's a nature poet. You can see where he comes from. He likes environment, he likes nature, he likes how humans interact with nature. He also sees the kind of differences as well as the similarities between humans and the natural world. He's interested in the way that we as modern people have become disconnected from nature. He's always very happy, fishing, hunting, spending time in nature. This was a time when hunting wasn't as stigmatized as it is nowadays. So nowadays, most people generally have a negative opinion of hunting rather than a neutral opinion, but in Hughes's time, it's a lot more common kind of thing to do. He loved being out in the natural world as much as possible. And he has personal, I think this has gone a bit funny here actually, but he has personal beliefs and spiritual beliefs about the natural world. He's interested in the idea that, the the energy of the universe is present in nature, a little bit like the Romantic poets. One thing that's quite cool is he is from a time when it's not popular really to be a nature poet. Most people are kind of city poets, town poets. Modernism, which starts around the 1920s, makes places like London sort of like cool and popular subjects for poetry. So Ted Hughes deciding that he's gonna, in the 1950s and 60s, he's gonna be a nature poet is quite unusual and not unheard of, but quite rare, a lot rarer. It's kind of like out of fashion. Yeah, and his spirituality is kind of tied up with his understanding of the natural world, and he feels like the natural world is also a spiritual world. So if you like romantic poets like Byron or Shelley or Keats, they have this type of idea as well inherent in their writing. There's, again, an old-fashioned kind of idea. He was forced to go to church when he was younger, but he was never kind of nominally a Christian exactly. He didn't really enjoy going to church. He kind of resented it. So his background is a Christian background, but I don't think, would recognize that he himself was a Christian. He's interested in also the shamanic potential of creativity. So he's got this kind of like, I don't know, he likes like mystical religions or weird older ancient religions, and he sort of infuses his poetry with that type of stuff. So that's kind of hard to understand. It takes quite a lot of reading to get to a point where you feel like you understand Hughes in that way, like how his spiritual beliefs connect to his poetry. But if you're doing deep analysis on Hughes, like you're doing a whole module on Hughes, or you're studying him at a higher level, or generally you're interested in him, I would recommend reading a lot more about that. So it's taken me quite a while of reading about that before I develop my own opinions on Hughes's spirituality. So you can't just put him in a box and say he's a Christian or he's an atheist or anything like that. He's got this kind of rich, personal, spiritual world that he lives in that he communicates through his poetry. So, his first poetry collection, The Hawk in the Rain, is 1957. And that's the one actually that my gran gave me, so that was the first one I read as well. It's really, really good. So if you want to generally read Hughes, start with that one. And yeah, he has some really cool other things that he wrote. The Rain Horse is a really mad short story, so if you feel like reading Hughes generally, The Rain Horse is a really good one. The Oresteia is a really cool translation he did of an ancient Greek tragedy, and I recommend that too. So he's a poet, firstly, but he did write other things as well. He had a very difficult and crazy life, so if by this point you're kind of interested in Hughes and you're not totally put off by him, I recommend reading about his life. It's mad. I've tried to summarize it a little bit in a paragraph here on the right hand side. That does not do it justice. Like, you need to read biographies about him or watch like a whole documentary on him. There is a film, I think, where Daniel Craig plays him. I think that's the absolute worst casting for Ted Hughes ever. Not that I don't like Daniel Craig, just that he doesn't suit how I view Hughes personally anyway. But yeah, he had a really crazy, difficult life that was very tragic and also quite randomly, chaotically unlucky. And he had all these weird spiritual beliefs about fate and destiny that then actually do sort of come true in his real life, because really mad stuff happens to him. And it makes his poetry very, very beautiful, very intense, and very dark and tragic at times. But it also makes us feel, or personally, I feel very sorry for him because of really bad stuff that happened to him. There's a debate in critical circles about whether he caused the stuff to happen to him or whether he's just really unlucky. And I don't know where I stand on that. So if you're interested in that idea of like, was he a terrible person that caused terrible things, or was he a victim of something greater that just meant he was a hugely unlucky person? There's a really good book that came out called Red Comet that I'm partway through reading that has a look at Ted Hughes's life and Sylvia Plath's first wife's life, and tries to give a balanced answer on that question. So yeah, read it. Is pretty big, like that's why I'm only partway through it, because I sort of pick it up every so often to read. But Red Comet is a good book to read if you're interested in that. So yeah, let's have a look here then at what more we have. Influences on his poetry. If that's useful to you, you can look through that. Like I said, there's quite a lot of romantics. Also, Gerard Manley Hopkins, who's a really beautiful nature poet. Edward Thomas, who's a really beautiful kind of quite abstract war poet. So yeah, nice sort of poetic tradition that he comes from, primarily a sort of English or UK based poetic tradition. And yeah, his career, like we said, with he's got a long-standing career. He's very well regarded, almost from the point of his very first collection. Everyone thinks he's a genius and he's great, and yeah, he probably is. This is the first poem that he ever published in Granta, which is still a magazine that runs today. So every so often I buy copies of Granta. Yeah, so The Little Boys and the Season is the first thing that he ever published. You can see that's 3 years before he publishes that full collection, A Hawk in the Rain. And yeah, he's very, very forward thinking. So like I was saying, romantic poetry or nature poetry, sort of spiritual nature poetry is what romantic poetry is. That was out of fashion in the 1950s when Hughes started writing. But it became really popular in the 1980s. So as Hughes got older, he actually got more popular over time as well, which is pretty cool, I think. And then really late on, he actually shifts topic. So it's a really interesting collection called Birthday Letters that is not nature poetry. It's about him and his relationship with his wife, Sylvia Plath, who was also a brilliant poet who tragically died by committing suicide. And it's kind of like exploring his thoughts and his guilt about that, but also remembering her and honoring her as a person and a poet. And it's such a beautiful collection. So if you want to see a totally different side to Hughes, read Birthday Letters. It's an amazing collection. Very, very different. So yeah, he's considered an amazing poet. He's not easy, but he's so worthwhile reading. And he's one of those people that the more you get to know him and understand him, the more pleasure you get out of the poetry, and you just find it really, like, I just think it's really cool. It's maybe a little cold at times, sometimes, if I'm going to criticize it at all. Like, I like poetry that makes me feel emotional, and it's less emotional. It's more kind of clever and analytical and sort of epic and spiritual. Like, it's not so much about himself. That's why I love Birthday Letters as a collection, because that one actually is more him. But yeah, absolutely beautiful poetry. Super strong on nature and spirituality. That they're the kind of two really strong driving forces through his poems. So we have a whole Ted Hughes study pack at scribbly.com and all these recorded video lessons that I made, example answers, practice essays, all sorts of stuff there. So go there if you want more stuff on Hughes, but hopefully this has been a really good introduction for you and you're feeling quite confident on him. I've talked very fast about many things, so hopefully some of that got across and you're feeling like you understand Hughes as a person. So yeah, thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you guys soon in a future lesson.